The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the low hum of the air conditioner. Evening light slipped through the blinds and drew pale lines across the bed where George lay. His breathing was shallow. Each breath sounded like it had to travel a very long way. Eleanor sat in the chair beside him. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her fingers would not stay still. They moved over each other, slowly twisting her wedding band, as if it were a small anchor she might lose at any moment. She wore the same light blue cardigan she had worn on their first date. The color had faded over the years, but she kept it for days like this, when she needed to feel the past close to her skin. She watched his chest rise and fall. Once, his body had seemed so strong. He had carried heavy boxes, climbed ladders, fixed leaky roofs, and held her with an easy, steady strength. Now his frame seemed to sink into the mattress, like the bed was slowly swallowing him. A thin hospital blanket covered him, but his hands rested above it, pale and still. "George," she said softly, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. He turned his head a little, as if the effort cost something. His eyes, cloudy with age and pain, found her face. The corners of his lips moved in a tired smile. "Ellie," he whispered. His voice was rough and dry. "Still here." The words were small, but they landed deep inside her. For 50 years, that voice had filled her mornings and evenings, her ordinary days and her hardest nights. Now every sound from him felt like something she needed to catch and keep. She reached for his hand and wrapped her fingers around it. His skin felt cool. The veins stood out like thin blue lines. She remembered his hands holding their first newborn child, planting roses in the backyard, fixing the broken cabinet door, turning the pages of his favorite books. "I'm here," she answered. "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, they did not speak. There was nothing to say that they had not said before. They had already talked about the funeral. They had spoken about the children, about the house, about the money in the bank. Practical things. The things people are supposed to discuss at the end. But there was something else in his eyes now. A quiet urgency. A question that had not yet been asked. He took a careful breath, like he was stepping onto thin ice. "Ellie," he said, "I need to ask you one more thing." Fear tightened in her chest. She did not know why. She only knew that whatever came next would matter. "What is it?" she asked. "You can ask me anything." He swallowed. His throat moved slowly. His gaze did not leave her face. "When I'm gone," he began, the words slow and broken, "I don't want you to fade away." She frowned. The idea sounded strange to her ears. Eleanor had never thought of herself as someone who might fade, yet she already felt like a shadow sitting in that chair. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I know you," he said. "You'll stay in that house. You'll close the curtains. You'll stop answering the phone. You'll stop going out. You'll think your life is finished because mine is." The truth of it passed between them like a cold wind. She looked away, toward the window, because she could not deny it. She had already imagined herself in the quiet house, moving from room to room like a ghost, touching his empty chair, his books, his coat on the hook. "I don't know how to live without you," she murmured. His fingers tightened weakly around hers. The grip was faint, but the intention behind it was strong. "You do," he said. "You just don't remember." She turned back to him. There was a look in his eyes that she had seen only a few times in their long life. Together when he proposed, when their first child was born, when they signed the papers for the little lakeside house. A look of quiet, steady certainty. "I want you to promise me something," he said. "Your final promise to me." Her heart thudded once, heavy and slow. Part of her wanted to stop him. She was afraid of promises, because she had never broken one to him, and she did not want to start now. "George," she began, "maybe you should rest." He shook his head a little. Even that tiny movement cost him strength. "Please, Ellie," he whispered, "let me say this." She nodded. She leaned closer so she would not miss a single word. Her hair brushed the edge of the pillow. "Tell me," she said. He took another breath. His chest rose and fell, as if he were gathering the last of his strength to place it into this one request. "Promise me," he said, "that you will keep living. Not just breathing, really living." The words hung in the air between them. Simple words, but heavy. "Go outside," he continued. "Tend the garden. See the neighbors. Travel, if you can. Laugh. Tell stories. Try new things. Don't lock yourself away with my memory. Don't turn our house into a museum for a dead man." A small, pained smile touched his lips as he said it. He was trying to make light of his own death, as if it were only another strange task on their long list of tasks. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, but they did not fall. "I don't want to forget you," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said. "I'm asking you to remember me the way I truly am. You know I never liked it when life stopped moving. Remember how I hated it when the garden went dry?" He gave a small, breathless laugh. "I want you to water your days," he murmured. "The way we watered those roses." His voice trembled, and his breath hitched. She could hear the effort it took for him to keep going. "George, please," she said, "you're tiring yourself." He ignored her plea. His eyes were locked on hers, wide and clear with an urgent, gentle plea. "Promise me, Ellie," he said again. "Promise that you will not hide. Promise that you will live enough for both of us." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had always thought that if he asked her anything at the end, it would be about the children, or about some secret regret, or about a practical matter she could handle with a list and a notebook. She had not expected this, a request that touched every day she had left. Her mind began to run in small circles. She saw herself alone in the kitchen, making tea for one. She saw herself walking through the empty house, touching his chair, stopping at his empty side of the bed. She saw herself in the backyard, looking at the dry, abandoned garden, unable to move. "I don't know if I can," she said. Her voice was thin and small. "I'm afraid." "I know you're afraid," he replied. "I am too. But I believe in you more than you believe in yourself." He paused, breathing slowly, gathering strength for the next words. "You've been my anchor for 50 years, he said. "Now I need you to be your own anchor. I need to know, before I go, that you won't just stop." She closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she saw the young man he had once been. The man who had stood at the end of a church aisle, smiling at her as if nothing in the world mattered more than her next step forward. She saw their small apartment, their first car, their first fight, their first gray hair. She saw the way he had always trusted her to be brave, even when she felt weak. When she opened her eyes, tears were running down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. "You're asking a lot," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But if I could, I would walk this part with you too. Since I cannot, this promise is how we walk it together." Silence followed. The heart monitor beeped in slow, steady rhythm. The evening light grew dimmer, sliding into the deeper blues of night. Somewhere in the hallway, a nurse's shoes tapped a gentle pattern on the floor, then faded away. Eleanor thought of all the promises they had already kept. To be faithful, to stay in sickness and in health, to stand side by side through job losses, illnesses, the deaths of their own parents. They had not done anything perfectly, but they had stayed. Through everything, they had stayed. She realized that this final promise was not only about him. It was about who she would be when he was gone. A woman who closed all doors, or a woman who opened at least one. Slowly, she lifted his hand to her lips and kissed the knuckles. "All right," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I promise. I will try to live, not just survive. I will tend the garden. I will see people. I will keep moving." He let out a long, soft breath. Relief passed over his face, gentle and deep. "That's my girl," he whispered. His eyes grew heavy. His grip loosened, but he did not let go of her hand. She watched him as his breathing settled into a slow, fragile rhythm. The nurse came in, checked the machines, adjusted a tube, and left again with a quiet nod. Eleanor stayed where she was, her fingers still wrapped around his. She could feel the promise sitting inside her like a new, unfamiliar weight. It did not feel comfortable. It did not feel easy. But it felt real. Hours later, just before dawn, George's breathing changed. Each breath came further apart, as if he were walking away, step by step down a long, invisible road. "George," she whispered. "I'm here." He did not answer, but for a brief second, his fingers moved, a tiny squeeze, like a farewell. Then his chest rose one last time, and fell, and did not rise again. The heart monitor began to sound a long, flat tone. Nurses came running. A doctor entered, checked for a pulse, and spoke in a calm voice that seemed far away. Eleanor did not hear the words. She stared at George's face, now strangely peaceful. The man she had loved for 50 years was gone, yet the shape of him still lay there, the lines of his life still visible on his skin. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. "I promised," she whispered. "I won't forget." When she finally stood up and stepped away from the bed, she felt as if she were leaving more than a room. She was stepping out of the life she had known and into something new, dark, and uncertain. But inside that darkness, one clear thread remained: her final promise to him. The taxi stopped at the edge of the small lane, just before the narrow path that led to the lakeside house. The driver got out and opened the door for Eleanor. Morning light lay over the neighborhood like a thin gray blanket. It was the kind of day when the sky seemed tired, the clouds low and heavy. "Are you sure you don't need help with your bags, ma'am?" the driver asked. She shook her head and gave him a faint smile. "No, thank you. I'll be all right," she said. The words felt automatic. She had been saying them all week. At the hospital, at the funeral home, at the church, people offered help, and she said she would be all right. She did not know if it was true. She only knew how to say the phrase. She paid the driver, then watched the taxi pull away. The sound of the engine faded, leaving behind a deep, ringing quiet. No traffic, no voices, only the soft rustle of wind through the tall trees near the water. Her suitcase stood on the ground beside her, a small, square reminder that she had gone away and now returned alone. She took the handle and began to walk down the path. The gravel shifted under her feet. Each step echoed in the silence. The house came into view slowly, like something rising from memory. The white paint, a little worn at the edges. The front porch with its 2 wooden chairs. The small window box beneath the living room window, still filled with soil but no flowers. For a moment, Eleanor stopped. Her chest tightened. There it was, the life they had built. Their place. Their quiet corner of the world. Yet even from the outside, she could feel that something inside had been cut away. She climbed the 3 steps to the front porch. The boards gave a soft creak under her weight. The same sound they had made for years. She reached into her purse for the key. It took her fingers a little longer than usual to find it. When she finally did, the metal felt cold in her hand. She placed the key in the lock and turned it. The familiar click sounded like a question. She pushed the door open. The smell of the house greeted her first. A mixture of old books, laundry detergent, and something warm she could never quite name. It was the smell of evenings with George, of Sunday mornings, of quiet winters by the fire. But there was no sound. No radio playing soft jazz in the background. No slow footsteps coming from the hallway. No low humming from the kitchen. George. The name slipped out before she could stop it. It hung in the air for a second, then fell away into silence. Of course there was no answer. She knew that. Still, the part of her that lived on habit had expected his voice, his laugh, his reply of, "In here, Ellie." She stood in the doorway a little longer than she needed to, her hand resting on the edge of the door frame. It felt as if the house was waiting for her to step inside and confirm that time had truly moved on. Finally, she pulled her suitcase over the threshold and closed the door behind her. The soft click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. The living room was exactly as they had left it. George's armchair stood by the window, the cushion slightly indented in the shape of his body. His reading glasses rested on the side table, next to the lamp, and the thick mystery novel he had been halfway through. A plaid blanket lay folded on the back of the chair, the corners slightly uneven, the way he always left it. Eleanor placed her purse on the small bench by the door. She slipped off her shoes and lined them up neatly, one beside the other, just as she always did. The normal gesture felt strange. It was as if she were trying to act out a scene from her old life. But one of the main actors was missing. She walked into the living room. Every step felt slow, as though the air itself had become heavy. She reached for George's glasses and picked them up. The frame was warm from the sunlight streaming through the window, but it no longer reflected his touch. She turned the glasses over in her hands. There was a faint scratch on one lens, the one he always said he would get fixed someday and never did. She pressed the glasses against her chest for a moment, then set them back in exactly the same spot. She did not yet have the courage to move anything he had left behind. Her gaze traveled around the room. The bookshelf, lined with decades of paperbacks. The framed photo of the 2 of them on their 40th anniversary, smiling awkwardly as the grandchildren surrounded them with frosting on their faces. The small clock on the mantel ticking softly, as if time saw no reason to pause. The funeral had been only yesterday, but it already felt far away. She saw it again in her mind. The polished wooden casket, the flowers arranged in careful rings, the sympathetic faces of family and friends. People had hugged her, patted her shoulder, pressed tissue into her hands. He lived a good life, they had said. He loved you so much. He's in a better place now. She had nodded each time. She had thanked them. She had watched their lips move and heard the words as if from underwater. Their kindness had been real, but their lives were still full. They had somewhere to go afterward. Dinner plans, jobs, children. Eleanor had gone back to the hospital room one last time to collect his things. A watch, a ring, a few folded clothes in a plastic bag. Then she had taken the taxi back to this house. Their house. Now her house. She moved toward the kitchen. Her fingers brushed the back of his chair at the small table, where they had eaten breakfast almost every morning. She could see him there, in her mind's eye, stirring sugar into his coffee, tapping the spoon on the edge of the mug 3 times, always 3. Bad luck if it's 4, he used to joke. She stepped into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Milk, eggs, leftover soup in a clear container, half a lemon wrapped in plastic. Everything seemed normal, but she knew he would never open this door again. She closed it gently and leaned both hands on the counter. Her shoulders sagged. She took a deep breath, then another, as if she had to remind her body how to keep going. Her eyes landed on the small calendar pinned to the wall. A red circle marked the date of his last checkup, now long past. Below it, in his neat handwriting, were the words "Plant new roses." She stared at the words until they blurred. "The garden," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the empty kitchen. The garden had been his pride. He had cared for it year after year. Even when his back had started to hurt and his knees ached, he would come inside with dirt on his hands and a smile on his face, holding a single perfect rose as if it were a treasure. She turned away from the calendar. She did not feel ready to look at the garden yet. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. The thought of it, waiting for him, outside, now without him, made her throat tighten. She went back to the living room and sank slowly onto the sofa. The cushion sighed beneath her, letting out a soft puff of air. Her body felt made of stone. For a while, she simply sat there. The house settled around her, ticking and humming the way houses do when they are at rest. The clock on the mantel counted each second with calm precision. She was not ready to cry. The tears felt locked somewhere deep inside, behind a wall. Her mind had built to keep her from breaking apart. Instead, she felt numb. The numbness was not peace. It was just a blank, heavy space where feeling should have been. Her eyes drifted back to George's armchair. She stared at it as if she expected him to appear there, to lean back, to make some quiet joke about the hospital, food or the fuss people made at funerals. "I'm home," she said, very softly, as if talking to him. "But it doesn't feel like home." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, like it belonged to someone else. She thought about calling their daughter, Anna, or their son, Michael. She could hear what they would say. "Mom, you can come stay with us for a while. You don't have to be alone right now." The idea was kind, but the thought of packing another bag, of sleeping in a different bed, of smiling politely at her grandchildren, while her heart felt hollow, it was too much. She could not face anyone else's life while hers felt so broken. "I'll be fine," she had told them at the funeral. "I need some time in the house." They had not liked it, but they had respected it. They knew this place was full of her memories. They knew this was where she had to face the truth. Now, sitting there, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The silence pressed in from all sides. There was no one to share a cup of tea with, no one to comment on the weather, no one to ask, "Did you hear that?" When a branch tapped the window, she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw little flashes of their life together. George painting the living room walls, while she laughed at the streak of white on his nose. George dancing with her in the kitchen to a song on the radio, his feet slightly offbeat but his grin wide. George sitting on the dock at sunset, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the sky change color. The images came in quick, sharp bursts. They did not comfort her. They made her feel like she was being dragged backward into a place she could no longer reach. Her hand drifted to her chest, resting over the spot where her heart beat. She thought of the promise she had made in the hospital. "I will try to live." The words seemed far away now. In the quiet house, with his empty chair in front of her, they felt almost impossible. "How?" she whispered into the air. "How am I supposed to do that?" No answer came. Only the soft ticking of the clock. A small sound broke the stillness. It was faint, like a scrape or a rattle. Eleanor opened her eyes and listened. It seemed to come from somewhere above her, the ceiling, the attic, the old wooden bones of the house shifting as the day grew warmer. She dismissed it. The house always made little noises. George used to say it was breathing. "Old houses talk," he would say. "They creak and settle and complain, just like we do." The memory brought the ghost of a smile to her lips, then faded. Eleanor slowly pushed herself up from the sofa. Her legs felt stiff. She moved through the living room to the hallway. On the wall hung pictures from every stage of their life: weddings, birthdays, vacations, ordinary days on the porch. She paused in front of one photo. It showed the two of them standing in the backyard, surrounded by blooming roses. George's arm was around her waist. They were both laughing at something out of frame. She touched the glass lightly. "I don't know where to start," she said to the picture. "Without you here, I don't know where anything begins." Her voice trembled. For the first time since she had entered the house, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away. Not yet. She was not ready to fall apart. Instead, she walked to the bedroom. Their bed, neatly made, waited in the center of the room. His side of the closet door was closed. She did not open it. She was not ready to see his shirts hanging there without him inside them. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. The room smelled faintly of his aftershave and laundry soap. She folded her hands in her lap, the way she had at the hospital, and stared at the pattern on the bedspread. In this room, the promise felt louder. There was nowhere to look where he had not been, nowhere to rest her eyes that did not hold a trace of him. Her heart whispered, it would be easier not to try, easier to let the days slip into one long, quiet line, to stay inside, to avoid people, to keep the world small and safe and still. Her memory whispered back in his voice, "Don't turn our house into a museum for a dead man." The conflict settled inside her like two tides pulling in opposite directions. She lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and drew the blanket over herself. For now, she could not make plans. She could not think about the garden or the neighbors or the future. She could only breathe, one slow breath at a time, in a house that remembered everything and said nothing. Outside, the lake moved against the shore in gentle waves. Inside, the empty house held its silence, waiting for the first small change that would come. The next morning arrived quietly, with pale light settling across the house, like a thin sheet of frost. Eleanor lay awake long before the sun touched the windows. Sleep had come in brief, broken pieces, leaving her body tired and her mind foggy. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Each tick reminded her that another second had slipped away without George in the world. Eventually, she pushed the blanket aside and rose from the bed. Her movements were slow, as if her limbs carried weights. She walked to the bathroom, washed her face, and stared at her reflection. Her eyes looked older than she remembered, ringed with exhaustion and something deeper in emptiness she could not name. She dressed in simple clothes and made herself a cup of tea in the kitchen. The spoon clinked gently against the side of the mug, the sound echoing too loudly in the quiet room. She carried the mug to the window over the sink. The view beyond the glass was familiar, yet today it felt strange, distant. Through the window she saw the backyard. The roses George had tended for years once stood in neat rows, blooming in bright reds, soft pinks, and creamy whites. But now, the garden looked forgotten. Brown leaves clung weakly to branches, weeds pushed through the soil. The bushes sagged under the weight of neglect. A soft ache spread through Eleanor's chest. She set the mug down slowly. "I'm so sorry, George," she whispered to the empty room. The garden had been his pride. Even when his health began to fail, he had insisted on stepping outside with a small trowel and his old straw hat. She had scolded him gently for working too hard, but he would only smile and say, "These roses listen better than most people." She walked to the back door and opened it. The cool morning air brushed against her skin. She stepped onto the porch and inhaled deeply. The scent of damp earth mixed with the faint smell of dead leaves. A bird chirped somewhere above her, breaking the stillness for a moment. Eleanor stood at the top of the steps. The garden spread out before her, marked by neglect, but still holding the shape of what it once had been. She felt something shift inside her, not quite pain, not quite longing, but a tug, gentle and persistent. She descended the steps slowly. The grass brushed against her shoes. The soil beneath her feet felt uneven. When she reached the first rose bush, she touched one of the brittle branches. It cracked slightly under her fingers. "You'd hate this," she murmured. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. The overgrown garden was more than a piece of land. It was a reflection of her current life, untended, quiet, slipping into shadows. The promise she had made in the hospital room rose again in her memory. "I will try to live." The words felt too big for her today. She could barely make herself drink breakfast tea. How was she supposed to live enough for both of us, as George had asked? But standing here, in the mess of his once loved roses, she felt something she hadn't expected, a small pull toward action. Not confidence, not strength, just a first nudge. She crouched down to inspect the soil at the base of the bushes. The earth was dry. She touched it with the tips of her fingers. It crumbled easily. "He always watered you at dawn," she whispered to the roses. "Every morning, even when his hands hurt." Her throat tightened at the memory. She could see him bending slowly, humming softly, greeting each flower like an old friend. She wished she could go back in time, even for a second, to watch him walk across the garden with his watering can. A breeze passed through the yard, making the dry branches rustle. The sound reminded her of the first rainy day they had spent in this house. George had told her the garden would sing when the wind came through it. Now the sound was sharp and brittle, like a voice weakened by age. Eleanor stood again. Her knees complained at the movement, and she steadied herself with a small sigh. "I can't fix all of this today," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear. "But maybe I can look." She walked the length of the garden, studying the wilted bushes, the broken trellis George had planned to repair, the small stone path that had disappeared under weeds. Each step felt like a slow walk through memory. Here was where they had planted their first rose together. There was where she had slipped in the mud, and he had laughed until tears ran down his face. By the fence was the spot where he had once knelt and proposed planting a new variety, something bold, he had said, like you. She stopped at the back corner of the yard. A climbing rosebush had grown wild, its branches twisting in every direction. She reached out and gently pushed the vines aside. Beneath them, hidden from sight, was the small wooden sign George had carved years ago. "Ellie's Garden," it read. The paint had faded, but the letters were still clear. Her breath caught. She knelt slowly, brushing dirt off the wood with her sleeve. The sign felt warm from the sun, as if it had been waiting quietly for her return. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly, almost embarrassed, though there was no one around to see. "I'm here," she whispered to the sign. "I didn't want to be, but I'm here." She sat back on the ground, letting her hands rest in her lap. A few dry leaves clung to her shoes. The silence of the garden wrapped around her, but it did not feel as empty as the house had. There was something alive here, even in its neglected state. Something that remembered him. Something that could still be rebuilt. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds, the rustle of the wind, a distant bird, the faint movement of branches. She felt the weight of her grief settle, not heavier but more familiar. The garden was broken, but it had not given up. And neither had she, not entirely. When she finally rose to her feet, she brushed dirt from her hands. A small idea had taken root in her mind. "Maybe tomorrow," she said softly. "Maybe tomorrow I'll bring the shears." The promise felt impossible again, but not completely. There was a small crack in the wall of her grief, just wide enough for a thin ray of intention. She looked once more at the sign, "Ellie's Garden." Then she turned back toward the house. Her steps were slow, but they carried her forward. The garden waited behind her, patient, like a place ready to bloom again when she was. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the living room floor as Eleanor sat alone on the sofa, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She had tried reading, then knitting, then simply walking from room to room, as if something inside the house might tell her what to do next. But nothing helped. Grief settled over her like a heavy blanket, warm in places but suffocating in others. A soft creak came from somewhere above her. The same sound she had heard the previous day. She lifted her head and listened. The attic. The house always made noises, but this one felt different, persistent, almost like a tap on her shoulder. Eleanor stood slowly. Her knees ached as she pushed herself up, but she did not sit back down. Instead, she walked toward the hallway. At the end of it, just past the framed family photographs, was the narrow pull-down attic ladder. Dust had settled in the small groove around the hatch. She had not opened it in months. Her hand hovered for a moment over the small metal ring. "I don't know what you expect me to find," she murmured, unsure whether she was speaking to the house or to George. Finally, she grasped the ring and pulled. The hatch opened with a long sigh, as though the attic itself had exhaled after waiting too long. The wooden ladder unfolded with a dry, slow creak, each rung complaining softly under its own unused weight. Eleanor stared up into the dim space above. Sunlight entered only in thin streaks through the small window at the far end. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny drifting stars. The space felt untouched, suspended in time. She hesitated. "You hated when I climbed this thing," she whispered. "Said I'd break my neck." There was no answer, only the quiet patience of the house. She placed one foot on the first rung. The ladder held her weight. Slowly, step by step, she climbed. Her breath grew a little unsteady halfway up, but she kept moving until her head rose above the attic floor. The room smelled of old wood, cardboard, and cedar. Boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in George's handwriting, winter clothes, Christmas ornaments, books, old letters. She felt a soft ache in her chest at the sight of his neat block letters. She stepped fully into the attic. her slippers brushing against the dusty floorboards. The air was slightly cooler here. Quiet, too quiet, as if the world below did not exist. "What am I doing up here?" she whispered. But something urged her forward. She walked past the old lamp they never threw away, past the small, rocking horse their son had played with, past the crooked mirror that had been too sentimental to discard. Each object felt like a soft tug on her memory. Then she stopped. On top of a stack of boxes, almost as if placed deliberately in plain sight, was a wooden box she had never seen before. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, made of dark walnut, its surface smooth and polished. A thin layer of dust covered the top, but the box looked newer than everything else around it. Her breath caught as she reached for it. On the lid, carved carefully in familiar hands, were the words, "For Ellie when you're ready." Her fingers shook. She traced the letters with the tips of her fingers. "George, what is this?" She lifted the box gently. It felt light but full, the kind of weight that suggested paper inside letters, maybe photographs. Her heart beat fast. A feeling she had not felt in days stirred in her chest, something like anticipation wrapped in fear. She carried the box to the small wooden stool by the window and sat. The stool wobbled slightly but held. The window cast a soft square of light over her lap. For a long moment, Eleanor simply held the box. Her hands trembled. She was afraid of opening it, afraid of what it might contain, afraid of how it might break her or hold her together. But George's handwriting whispered from the lid, "When you're ready." She took a slow breath, then lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, tied together with a thin blue ribbon. The top envelope had her name written on it in George's handwriting, not shaky or old, but strong the way he wrote years ago. Her breath hitched. She untied the ribbon carefully and opened the first envelope. A soft, folded letter slipped into her lap. She unfolded it. "My Ellie, if you are reading this, it means I have gone on ahead of you. I wrote this long before I knew when the day would come. Maybe you found this by accident. Maybe you were looking for something else. Or maybe you finally felt ready to hear my voice again." Her hand covered her mouth. His tone rose from the page with quiet certainty, as if he were sitting beside her, speaking slowly and gently. She continued reading. "I know you. I know how you hold your sorrow. You carry it quietly, pressed to your heart, where no one else can see. You will try to be strong. You will try to hide your grief from the children. You will pretend you are fine. But Ellie, you don't have to pretend with me." The words made her chest tighten. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. "Life will not be the same without us together. I will miss you, even where I am. But listen to me, do not close your world. Do not let the house grow silent. Do not let the garden go to sleep. There is still life waiting for you. There are people who will care for you, if you let them." A tear fell on the edge of the page. She wiped it quickly, afraid of staining his words. "We had a long, beautiful run, didn't we? 50 years of stories. 50 years of loving you. You gave me more joy than a man deserves. Now I want you to go on and find joy for yourself. Not because you owe me, because you deserve it." Her breath grew unsteady. She pressed the letter to her chest. The ache that had filled her since his death softened, not gone, but gentler. She reached for the next envelope. Her fingers brushed the edges of letters written years apart. Christmases, birthdays, ordinary Tuesdays. He had written to her through time, imagining the day she would need these words. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Oh, George, you knew." She opened another letter. His handwriting was slightly older, shakier. "Ellie, if I could, I would stay. But if I cannot, then let this be my arm around your shoulders. You are stronger than you believe. Strong enough to start again." Another tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. For the first time since he died, she did not hide them or wipe them away quickly. She let them fall. They landed on her hands, on the paper, on the wooden box. She cried softly, not the sharp, painful sobs she had expected, but a slow, steady stream that seemed to wash something clean inside her. Each tear carried a little bit of the heaviness she had been holding. After several minutes, she lifted another letter, then another. She read until the light moved across the floor and the attic grew warmer. Each letter had a different message. Some were tender, some were funny, some reminded her of their early years. All carried the same heartbeat beneath the words, his love stretching beyond his life. By the time she reached the bottom of the box, her breathing felt calmer, her shoulders lighter. She closed the lid gently, holding it for a moment against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I still don't know how to do any of this, but thank you." She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting on the small stool. She wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and looked around the attic. Somehow the space no longer felt so dusty or forgotten. The wooden box felt warm in her hands as she stepped toward the attic ladder. She climbed down carefully, each rung steady beneath her feet. At the bottom, she paused before closing the hatch. Then she whispered into the empty hallway, "I'm not ready yet, but I'm closer." It was not a promise, not yet, but it was the beginning of one. The next morning brought a soft gray sky and the gentle sound of wind brushing against the eaves of the house. Eleanor woke earlier than usual, not because she felt rested, but because something inside her refused to sleep any longer. Her dreams had been filled with George's letters, his handwriting glowing in the dim attic light, his voice weaving through her thoughts. She lay still for a few minutes, letting the quiet settle around her. The house felt different today, not louder, not brighter, but less heavy, as if some weight had shifted. When she finally rose from the bed, she moved more slowly than usual, her body stiff from yesterday's climb into the attic. She washed her face, put on a soft cardigan, and made her way to the kitchen. The kettle warmed on the stove, releasing a faint hiss of steam. As she waited, her eyes drifted toward the calendar on the wall. Yesterday's date still held the faint memory of tears in the attic. Under today's date, there was nothing written, no appointments, no reminders, no tasks. The quiet emptiness of the small square felt strangely like an invitation. The kettle whistled lightly. She poured herself a cup of tea and brought it to the table. She sat alone, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then came the knock. It startled her. The sound was bright and sudden in the stillness, like a small stone dropped into a silent lake. Eleanor froze, her hand wrapped around her mug. No one visited unannounced, not since the funeral. Another knock, gentle but clear. "Mrs. Bennet." A young woman's voice called. "It's Maya from next door." Eleanor closed her eyes. Maya, the young neighbor with warm eyes and an easy smile. The one who had brought soup during the hospital weeks and flowers to the funeral. She liked Maya, but she wasn't sure she was ready for company. Her first instinct was to ignore the knock, to slip back into the quiet. But George's words rose in her memory, warm and steady. "Don't close your world." Eleanor inhaled slowly. Then she stood, smoothed her sweater, and walked to the door. Her heart beat a little faster as she opened it. Maya stood on the porch, holding a basket covered with a clean cloth. Her face lit up when she saw Eleanor. "Good morning," Maya said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Eleanor shook her head. "No, not at all. I was just having tea." "I won't stay long," Maya added, sensing hesitation. "I just wanted to bring you something." She lifted the cloth from the basket, revealing freshly baked muffins, blueberry, by the smell of them. A warm, sweet scent drifted upward. "I made too many," Maya said, smiling sheepishly, "and I thought you might like some." Eleanor felt her chest soften. "That's very kind of you," she murmured. "Thank you." Maya hesitated. Then she added, "And some of the ladies from down the street are meeting this afternoon for knitting. Nothing formal, just tea, yarn, and talking." Eleanor's breath caught. She gripped the doorframe lightly. "Oh, I don't know if..." "You don't have to knit," Maya interrupted gently. "You can just sit with us, or drink tea, or listen. Whatever feels right." Eleanor's thoughts tumbled in quiet circles. She could already hear herself saying no. It was her usual answer to everything these days. The idea of sitting in a room with people, of trying to smile, of trying to talk, felt overwhelming. But then she remembered the letters. "There are people who will care for you, if you let them." She swallowed. "You're very sweet to think of me." Maya nodded, waiting with patient eyes. Eleanor felt the old habit rising again, the urge to retreat. But something small inside her, something that had awakened in the attic, pushed gently forward. "What time?" she asked quietly. Maya's face brightened with relief. 4 o'clock. "I'll walk with you, if you'd like." Eleanor didn't trust her voice, so she simply nodded. "I'll come by at 10 minutes too," Maya said. "And if you change your mind, that's all right too." She stepped back from the porch. "Enjoy the muffins. I'll see you later." When Eleanor closed the door, she leaned against it for a moment. Her heart flickered between fear and something lighter, hope. Maybe, though it still felt fragile. She walked to the kitchen, set the basket on the table, and uncovered the muffins. Warm steam rose into the air. She broke off a small piece and tasted it. Sweet, soft, comforting. As she chewed, she looked toward the living room, where George's chair sat by the window. "Well," she whispered, "you wanted me to start living." Her voice trembled, but she did not cry. Instead, she took another bite of the muffin and opened the curtains, letting more light into the room. Hours passed quietly. She moved slowly through her morning, dusting shelves, watering a houseplant she had forgotten the week before, folding the blanket on the sofa. Each small act felt like a step she had not expected to take. As the afternoon approached, she found herself standing in front of the bedroom mirror. She smoothed her hair, straightened her cardigan, checked the buttons on her blouse. It felt strange to prepare for something again. Strange, but not unpleasant. A soft knock came from the front door. "Mrs. Bennett?" Maya called gently. "Ready when you are." Eleanor took a breath. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment. Then she opened the door. Maya smiled warmly. "You look lovely today." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she said. "I'm a little nervous." "That's all right," Maya replied. "You don't have to do anything except sit with us. The rest will come on its own." The two women walked slowly down the driveway. Eleanor's steps hesitant but steady. As they turned the corner, Eleanor felt the faintest breeze lift a strand of her hair. The sound of distant laughter drifted from a nearby house, the sound of life continuing. For the first time since George's passing, she allowed herself to match her pace with someone else's. It wasn't joy, it wasn't confidence, but it was movement. And movement, she realized, was its own kind of promise. The knitting circle ended just before sunset. The walk home with Maya was calm and gentle, filled mostly with soft conversation and long, comfortable pauses. When they reached Eleanor's porch, Maya squeezed her hand lightly. "I'm glad you came today," she said. "So am I," Eleanor answered, surprised to realize she meant it. After Maya left, Eleanor stepped inside the quiet house. This time, the silence did not feel as sharp. There was still grief, still heaviness, but underneath it moved something new, a faint ripple, like a small current beneath still water. She placed her cardigan on the back of a chair and walked toward the kitchen window. The sky outside glowed in warm shades of gold and pink. The garden lay in shadow, its tangled branches forming dark, uneven shapes against the fading light. She stood there for a long moment, holding the edge of the counter, remembering the first letter she had read in the attic. "Don't let the garden go to sleep," George had written. She had folded that line with special care. Now, the garden seemed to wait for her, not demanding, not urgent, just present. After a few minutes, Eleanor opened the back door and stepped outside. The air carried the scent of damp soil and the distant lake. The evening breeze brushed against her face as she walked slowly down the steps. The garden looked just as it had the day before, overgrown, wilted, unbalanced, but tonight she did not turn away from it. She approached the nearest rose bush and touched one of its dry branches. It snapped at her fingertip, fragile as old paper. "I know," she whispered. "You've been lonely too." Her voice was soft, but in the quiet yard it sounded like a promise. She scanned the yard, taking in the broken trellis, the weeds that had stolen space from the flowers, the small stone path hidden under layers of leaves. The garden had once been a place of color and life, a place where she and George had spent many evenings talking, laughing, sometimes arguing gently about which roses needed pruning. She could almost hear him. "Cut too little and they sulk. Cut too much and they get dramatic." A small smile tugged at her lips. She turned back toward the house. Her body was tired from the long day, but something inside her resisted the idea of going in. Instead, she stepped onto the porch and opened the small storage bench by the wall. Inside lay an old pair of gardening gloves, a hand trowel, pruning shears, and a coil of twine. Dust covered everything. She lifted the gloves. The fabric had stiffened, and the leather palms were worn from years of use. She slid one glove onto her hand. It felt strange at first, tight in places, loose in others. But when she flexed her fingers, the glove softened as if remembering her shape. With a slow breath, she stepped back into the yard. She began with the weeds nearest the porch. They pulled easily from the soil, roots long and pale. Each one came free with a soft tearing sound. She tossed them into a small pile, working slowly, methodically. Her movements were careful but steady. She bent, pulled, straightened, moved to the next patch. Her breath created a small, rhythm, soft exhales that matched the tug of her hands. She did not try to fix everything. She knew she couldn't, not in one evening, not in 1 week. But she could start. And starting felt like enough. As she worked, the sky darkened, and the first stars appeared overhead. A faint ache formed in her lower back, but she kept going until the patch near the porch looked clearer, until she could see small stretches of bare soil, where weeds had once been. She wiped her forehead with the back of her glove. "Well," she murmured, "it's a beginning." The breeze stirred again, rustling the branches gently. She imagined George standing beside her, hands in his pockets, squinting at the yard as he always did before deciding what to prune. "Not bad for your first day back," he would say with a lopsided grin. "A little rough, but full of potential." Eleanor let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She gathered the small pile of weeds and carried them to the compost bin near the fence. When she returned to the porch, she set the gloves on the step and straightened slowly. Her legs ached. Her back ached. But for the first time in many days, her heart did not. She looked out at the yard again. It still needed work, so much work, but she no longer saw only what had been lost. She saw what could return. The roses were tired, but not dead. The soil was dry, but still capable of holding seeds. The garden was waiting, and she had finally taken the first step toward meeting it. She whispered into the quiet yard, "Tomorrow, I'll bring water." Then she turned toward the house. The porch light cast a warm glow behind her, outlining her small, steady silhouette against the evening sky. As she stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, she carried with her a single truth. She was moving forward, not quickly, not confidently, but faithfully, and that was enough for one night. The morning of their anniversary arrived with a soft, golden light that crept slowly across the floorboards of Eleanor's bedroom. She woke before the alarm could ring, as if some part of her body remembered the date even before her mind did. For a moment she lay still, listening to the faint song of birds outside the window, and the distant hum of the lake. Then it hit her. Today marked 50 years since she had married George, their first anniversary without him. She sat up slowly. The ache in her chest was deep, but not sharp. It moved in gentle waves, heavy but bearable. She placed her feet on the floor, feeling the cool wood beneath her slippers. Her hands rested lightly on her knees as she let out a long, steady breath. In the weeks since she had found the letters, something inside her had shifted. The garden was no longer a place she avoided. The knitting group had become a small circle of warmth in her week, and in the quiet spaces of her house, she sometimes found herself speaking softly to George, not out of fear or denial, but out of love. Today, she wanted to do something he would have understood, something that honored both him and the promise she had made. After breakfast, she walked out to the garden. The morning sun brushed the tops of the rose bushes, revealing the progress she had made. The weeds were nearly gone. New buds appeared on several bushes, their small green forms filled with quiet determination. She had watered them every morning, trimming the dry branches, pulling away the dead leaves. The garden looked alive again, and so did she, in her own small way. Eleanor carried a small wooden box under her arm. It was the same one from the attic, the letters, tied with their blue ribbon, still resting inside. She walked slowly down the porch steps, the box held carefully against her chest. At the center of the garden, near the stone path George had laid by hand, stood a simple wooden bench. She had ordered it last week, choosing one with curved arms and a high back, just the sort George would have preferred. It was painted a soft, warm white. When it had arrived, she assembled it herself, reading the instructions twice to make sure it would be sturdy. Today would be its first day in the garden. She approached the bench and knelt beside it. Her knees complained, but she ignored the discomfort. She set the wooden box down on the bench, then opened it. The letters were still neatly tied, their edges worn slightly from being read and reread. Eleanor touched the top envelope with gentle fingers. "Happy anniversary, my love," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. She took the ribbon off slowly. One by one, she unfolded several letters, placing them carefully on the bench beside her. The words, written in George's steady handwriting, seemed to glow under the morning light. "You deserve joy. Don't close your world. Live enough for both of us." She read each line with quiet reverence. The memory of his voice drifted through the garden like a soft breeze. She felt the warmth of him, not the sharp pain of loss, but the steady comfort of love that had shaped so much of her life. Then she carefully arranged the letters inside the hollow space beneath the bench seat. She had asked a local carpenter to modify it for her. Not much, just a small compartment under the seat where she could keep things safe, things that mattered. Once the letters were placed inside, she closed the seat and smoothed her hand over the surface. "I think you'd like this spot," she whispered. "Plenty of sun, just enough breeze." Her throat tightened, but she kept speaking. "I'm trying, George. I really am. I still miss you every day. But I'm learning how to live with that. I'm learning how to live again." The breeze stirred the rose branches, making them sway gently. She sat on the bench and looked around the garden. The soil she had turned over, the weeds she had removed, the new buds promising future blooms. She let her hands rest loosely in her lap. As she breathed in the scent of earth and faint rose petals, For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Not healed, not finished, but peaceful. The sun warmed her shoulders as she leaned back. She closed her eyes and imagined George sitting beside her, his arm resting along the back of the bench, his fingers brushing hers. "You'd be proud of me," she murmured. "I kept my promise." Her voice carried softly through the garden, blending with the rustling leaves and distant birdsong. When she opened her eyes again, she felt steady, stronger than she had expected. The grief was still there, she knew it always would be, but it no longer felt like something that swallowed her whole. Instead, it felt like a thread woven into her days, a quiet reminder of a love that had lasted half a century. She stood slowly and brushed the dirt from her skirt. The garden shimmered with early sunlight, each leaf and petal holding a soft glow. Before going back inside, she whispered one more time, "Happy anniversary, darling." Then she turned toward the house. The roses swayed as if nodding gently, and the light on the garden path seemed to stretch forward, inviting her to walk into the next moment, the next day, the next quiet beginning. Eleanor stepped toward the porch with a heart that felt both full and ready. She had honored her promise. Eleanor woke before the sun rose. It wasn't the sharp, restless waking of grief that had jolted her from sleep in the early days, but a gentle stirring, like her body recognizing something had shifted. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the world outside her window. A bird called out once, twice, then fell quiet again. She sat up slowly, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders. The air was cool, with a faint scent of early morning dew drifting in from the slightly opened window. She slipped into her slippers and stood, feeling the calm strength in her legs. Today felt different, not because anything extraordinary was planned, but because she felt a small, steady warmth inside her, like a candle lit in a room she thought had gone dark forever. It was the morning after their anniversary, the morning after she had placed George's letters beneath the new garden bench. She walked into the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and waited. The walls around her no longer felt like a silent reminder of everything she had lost. Instead, they felt like a gentle echo of the life she and George had built, something she could live inside without feeling swallowed by the emptiness. As the kettle began to hum, she looked toward the back window. The garden glowed faintly in the earliest light. Dew glistened on the rose leaves, and the buds she had watched for days seemed slightly fuller. She smiled to herself. When the tea was ready, she carried her mug to the porch and stepped outside. The boards creaked softly beneath her feet, the familiar sound comforting rather than lonely. She walked down the steps and crossed the small stretch of grass toward the garden. The air was cool against her skin. A few birds hopped along the fence, chattering quietly as if deciding how to start their day. Eleanor approached the bench and touched the armrest lightly. "Good morning, George," she whispered. There was no answer, of course, but she felt no ache in the silence. Instead, she felt a sense of companionship. She sat down and took a slow sip of tea. The warmth spread through her chest. For a few minutes, she simply watched the garden, breathed small movements in the leaves, the faint shimmer on the petals, the soft stirring of the wind. She had tended this place for weeks now, little by little, reclaiming it from the grip of neglect. And as the garden came back to life, she had found herself coming back too. She placed her mug beside her and folded her hands in her lap. "All right," she said softly. "What now?" The question wasn't heavy. It carried no despair. It was simply curiosity, the gentle curiosity of someone discovering. She still had days ahead to fill. Her thoughts drifted to Maya and the women from the knitting circle. Yesterday, Maya had mentioned a small weekend trip, a drive to a nearby lakeside town, just for an afternoon of fresh air, lunch, and conversation. The idea had seemed too big then, too soon. But this morning, something inside her felt ready. Not completely, not perfectly, just ready enough. She picked up her tea again and sipped. "I think I'll go," she said into the morning air, as if telling the roses. "I think I'd like that." A soft breeze lifted the edge of her sweater, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the air move around her. It smelled of damp soil and new beginnings. Her mind wandered back to the hospital room, to her trembling voice, promising George she would try to live, not simply survive. In the beginning, she had feared those words. They had felt impossibly large, impossibly distant from where she stood in her grief. But sitting now on the garden bench, she realized she had already begun fulfilling that promise. She had opened the windows. She had walked outside. She had joined the knitting circle. She had restored the garden. She had allowed people back into her life slowly, carefully, but sincerely. George's letters had been the bridge, but her steps had been her own. She leaned back on the bench, letting her body rest fully against the smooth wood. For a long moment, she listened to the quiet morning, no cars, no engines, just the gentle rhythm of nature waking up. "I miss you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I always will." A bird landed on the corner of the bench, tilting its head at her as if listening. She smiled. "But I'm living, George. I'm really living." The bird hopped once, then flew away, disappearing into the sky. Eleanor stood slowly, stretching her back. She picked up her mug and walked along the stone path George had built. She admired the roses, touching one of the new buds lightly with her fingertips. As she moved toward the house, she felt a quiet hope strengthening inside her, not loud or dramatic, but steady, like the slow opening of a flower. Today she would call Maya. She would say yes to the trip. She would take another step into the world. And tomorrow? Tomorrow she would see what life brought her. She opened the back door and stepped inside, carrying the morning light with her. The house felt warm, not empty. Her days, once silent and heavy, now stretched ahead, like an open path waiting, inviting, alive. Eleanor placed her mug in the sink, straightened her shoulders, and smiled to herself. Her promise had not ended in the garden, it had only begun there.